Hello and welcome to the post-game show for Warhammer 40k 8th edition Battle Report number 2, Death Guard versus Ultramarines. There's a lot of things to talk about at the end of this game, first of which is the fact that since the Ultramarines conceded, we need to talk about a little bit about why and sort of my thinking behind it and why I felt it was appropriate at the time to make such a decision. So the first thing that we need to talk about while we pan over the remnants of the battlefield here is the fact that the Ultramarines were not going to be able to come back from the deficit that they were in when it came to the victory points. We take a look at their tactical objective cards that they had drawn. Secure Objective 2, Death from Above, Mission Critical Objective, which was Objective Marker number 4. They weren't going to be able to get any of those in their turn 6, which would mean that they would still, at the end of turn 6, only have the 4 victory points. Now, the Intercessor Sergeant over here could move 6 inches over this way to put himself within the Death Guard deployment zone, which would then get Line Breaker, which is great, puts them up to 5. But the problem is, there was no way other than that they were going to get enough victory points to come back and match the Death Guard's 11. Because remember, they have 11, and that's not even including Line Breaker or Warlord Kill. And this Land Raider, if the game had gone into turn 7, most likely would have moved up the board 10 inches into the enemy deployment zone, which would have granted them Line Breaker, canceling out the Ultramarines, and also would have provided some straight shots with its last cannons onto Guilliman. And of course, if Guilliman goes down, that's a Warlord kill for the Death Guard. Speaking of Warlord kills, the Lord of Contagion for the Death Guard is nice and safe over by those Poxwalkers, but he has the Plague Burst Crawler and the Land Raider between him and all of the Ultramarines units. So both of those tanks would have to be killed off before they could even attempt to shoot the Lord of Contagion. And with one bolt rifle, Guilliman's Hand of Dominion, and one last cannon, I don't think that they have the firepower needed to take 10 wounds off of Land Raider and 5 wounds off of Plague Burst Crawler. Because remember, they're both toughness 8. Which means Guilliman would be wounding on 5s, the Intercessor Sergeant would be wounding on 6s. The last cannon could wound on a 3, but it also only does D6 damage. So while on one hand it could do 6 and bring the Land Raider down to 4, at the same time, if it goes through, it could do 1. And then the Land Raider would still have 9 left. Another issue is the only objective that the Ultramarines are holding at the end of Death Guard turn 6 is objective marker number 3 with that tactical marine. So the question becomes, well, how can the Ultramarines get more objectives? Well, the problem is they can't. Not at least until turn 7. Because in turn 6, Guilliman can move 8 inches, but he would still be 4 or 5 inches away from objective marker 6. So he wouldn't hold that one. And the Intercessor Sergeant is way too far away from both objective marker 5 and objective marker 1. So he wouldn't hold any. So even if it went into turn 7, the Ultramarines would only still hold 1 objective marker, only being able to draw 1 tactical objective. And just for fun, let's take a look at what that would be, which is defend objective marker 1, which they could potentially get. They could potentially hold objective marker 1, but they would not be able to hold it for 2 full turns. So while I did not know what that tactical objective card was when I conceded the game on behalf of the Ultramarines, that just validates the decision, because it would have been they wouldn't have gotten any more points. They would have gotten Line Breaker to bring them up to 5, and that would have been it. So at best case scenario for the Ultramarines, they would have lost 5 to 11. And that's, of course, assuming Guilliman survives, the Tactical Marine survives, the Intercessor Sergeant survives. And that's another thing, too. Even if that Tactical Objective card, Defend Objective 1, let's say it had been something much better. I don't remember off the top of my head if there's an objective card like this in the Ultramarines Tactical Objective deck, but let's say it could grant 6 victory points, and it was actually achievable. The problem is that if the game had gone into turn 7, the Death Guard would have focused everything they could to kill this Tactical Marine. Because if this Tactical Marine dies, then the Ultramarines are holding 0 objectives, which means they would not be able to draw any Tactical Objective cards. So it doesn't matter. The next Tactical Objective card would be worth 1,000,000 points, and they wouldn't even be able to draw it to attempt to get it because they wouldn't be holding anything. So that's the first problem. The second problem, which I sort of mentioned earlier, but if Guilliman comes out into the open to try to grab this objective, there's a good chance that this Land Raider will just attempt to kill him off, which would give Warlord kill to the Death Guard, and of course the Death Guard with this Land Raider are still holding Objective 4. Now, it's possible that a combination of Guilliman and the Last Cannon could do enough to kill off the Land Raider, which would mean they would not be able to draw any new ones. And that's completely true. But it's not the Land Raider that would be the biggest threat to the Tactical Marine. That would be the Plagueburst Crawler and its mortar. Because the Tactical Marine cannot see the Plagueburst Mortar, and the Plagueburst Crawler cannot see each other thanks to this very solid building and this slightly holy building being in the middle. But because of this solid building, they can't see each other. So the only weapon between the two would be the mortar. And of course, the mortar can shoot units that it can't see. But most likely, the game would have ended with very similar victory points as we have now. So 11 for the Death Guard and 4 for the Ultramarines. So that's the main reason. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the really awesome things that happened in this battle report. And then we'll get back to some what-if scenarios. So first and foremost, I have to say, Lord of Contagion did a ton for the Death Guard. He has easily got to be a contender for the Death Guard MVP. He held an objective, kept it secure so that the Plague Marines could move up and try to work their magic, and the Land Raider could move over and try to work its magic against the Paladin. And then when no one else could finish off the Paladin, the Lord of Contagion walked on over and finished it off. Took a couple turns, but he was the one who did the final blow. And because he killed that Paladin, he secured 3 different tactical objective cards for the Death Guard. One of which, or a couple of which, were actually worth a lot. So, or could have been worth a lot. One of the D3s ended up being 1 victory point. And the fact that he managed to fight the Knight Paladin in close combat and only lost a wound, that amazes me. Absolutely amazes me, because this Knight Paladin, he's a beefy guy, right? He's got the Thunderstrike Gauntlet, he's got Titanic Feet, he's got all those ranged weapons. I think part of the problem strategically that the Knight Titan had was he spent too much time firing at the Poxwalkers. I think looking back at it now, that ended up not being a good idea. Should have just focused everything onto the Plagueburst Crawler to try to finish it off as quickly as possible. That or the Land Raider. But all those heavy stubber shots, all those Iron Storm missile pod shots, they barely did anything. They did finish off the one squad at the end, which took them off of objective marker 1. So that is something. But the fact that they might have been able to do an extra wound or two to the Plagueburst Crawler, maybe it would have been enough to finish it off. I don't know. That's sort of getting into the what-if scenarios. The other thing that did well was the Land Raider, when it could. Being able to move around, shoot some heavy shots, and cause a distraction, which really helped. Because there were many times that the Knight Paladin was sort of just chasing it around the board in order to try to do damage to it, or at least keep it occupied and force it to move back. The Land Raider was a large enough threat that it was able to cause problems to the Ultramarines. And in the end, they only did 6 wounds to it out of the 16. Somehow it survived the last cannon blast at the end in turn 5 from that tactical Marine. But the fact that it was able to roll around the board and stayed pretty much fairly healthy for the entire game is there's something to be said about that. And of course, had we gone through the Ultramarines turn, which would have been very short since they only have the 3 models left on the board, and had the game continued into turn 7, which there's only a 50% chance of happening, his ranged abilities with those last cannons and the twin heavy bolter, that would have caused some major problems for Guilliman if he stays out in the open, which is part of the dilemma for the Ultramarines, which contributed to their deciding to concede. Because most likely the smart thing would be for Guilliman to come back here, hide around this corner out of line of sight, so that nothing can shoot him, making sure to not be the closest model to any of the enemy models. And that way he would stay alive and deny Warlord kill, but the problem is that he doesn't do anything. He doesn't shoot, he doesn't move himself into a better position to charge. And so, while strategically it would be smarter to hide him, tactically you almost want to put him out in the open to draw the enemy fire and to maneuver yourself into a better position to be able to set up the next turn. The problem is you expose yourself by doing so and potentially draw a whole bunch of fire. And if he had moved 8 inches towards this objective, then he would have definitely been the closest model to both the Land Raider. He already was. Well, I mean, he's already the closest model to both of them anyways. But so the Ultramarines didn't really have very many good choices at the end. Now, that's partially set up by a couple of things. First and foremost, one of the MVPs for the Ultramarines isn't even an Ultramarine. It's the Imperial Knight Titan, the Knight Paladin, who did a ton, chasing the Land Raider around the board. And the Land Raider did well for the Death Guard, but because the Knight Paladin for 2 or 3 turns kept charging it, it forced the Land Raider to fall back, which forced it to not be able to shoot, which was a big deal, because that took a lot of firepower off of the board for the Death Guard. I think had that Land Raider been left alone, most likely, by this point, the Ultramarines would have been tabled. I mean, just taking a look at the fact that they only have 3 models left and only one of them is a higher toughness model. Both the Tactical Marine and the Intercessor Sergeant are only toughness 4. So, Knight Paladin did a lot. Killed a number of units, caused a big distraction. He soaked up a ton of firepower. I was really thinking at the beginning of Death Guard turn 6 that at the end of everything, the Lord of Contagion's Nurgle's Gift, or Nurgle's Rot, that ability was going to end up killing the Paladin on a 4+, that we'd roll for the 4+, it would just wipe out the Paladin, and then of course, because that was at the beginning of the turn, and now no one's locked in combat, then the Land Raider would be able to move around freely and shoot stuff. So it could have been in Death Guard turn 6, he potentially could have shot and killed Guilliman in turn 6. And at that point, the Ultramarines would practically be tabled. So the Knight Paladin, he did a lot. And it's definitely worthy of an MVP nomination for the Ultramarines. The other model that deserves that is not Guilliman, but the Intercessor Sergeant. Oh my goodness, I was impressed with this guy. The fact that he killed off that Demon Prince, took the last wound off of him. He's been moving around, he's trying to get Linebreaker. The fact that he survived a volley from the Plague Burst Mortar trying to kill him off at the end. He needs like a Purity Seal or something, a new Purity Seal. Might have to paint one up for him. But he is definitely worthy of an MVP nomination. I think he is the MVP. Just because he managed to kill off that Knight, the Demon Prince, and the fact that he was able to run around and do so much. He almost got Linebreaker. He definitely would have had we played out the Ultramarines turn 6. Not that would have done much. And he's not even hurt. He's got 2 wounds. He's not even hurt. Didn't take a single wound. The rest of his squad died, but he's perfectly fine. So, good for him, I guess. Moving around to the other units that were on the board. The Plague Burst Crawlers did fine. The Poxwalkers did fine. The Plague Marines did fine. The Blight Lords did fine, other than the fact that I forgot to move them once or twice. I think it's because of the fact that they're still gray. They kind of blended in with this crater over here, and so I forgot that they even existed. The Demon Princes did pretty well, especially considering the fact that they killed off that one tactical squad right away with psychic powers. And that's one thing that really hurt the Ultramarines, in my opinion, right at the start of the game. The fact that turn 1, the 2 Demon Princes are able to both smite the one tactical squad that was sitting on this building and completely wipes them out. Then in their shooting phase, the Death Guard kill off like 8 of the Hellblasters. That's a lot of points. They're 18 points a model and 15 points apiece for their plasma incinerators. They're 33-point models with their weapons. They killed off 8 of them. That's a lot of points that went down the tubes right away for the Ultramarines, which didn't help. We didn't get to really see what the plasma incinerators on the Hellblasters could do. I mean, they killed off one of the Blight Lord Terminators using supercharged shot. But yeah, they were sitting down here. They were going to move up to Objective 4, and they were going to hold that with the captain and the lieutenant, and they didn't. They didn't do anything. So they all got killed off right away, and that was very unfortunate. I feel like that, right from the beginning of the game, the fact that the Ultramarines held on for so long, the fact that had this Night Titan not been killed off when it was, if he had survived the Lord of Contagion's attacks, somehow makes it through, if he had managed to kill off the Lord of Contagion instead, had that been flipped and he killed the Lord of Contagion, made it through all their attacks, killed the Lord of Contagion, he then could have caused a huge problem still over here, because he could have fired everything he had into the Poxwalkers and the Plague Burst Crawler, charged the Land Raider, which most of the game wasn't able to do anything in Overwatch until the very end when it took off 5 wounds with an overwatching last cannon. 4 or 5 wounds, something like that. But for most of the game, the Land Raider hadn't done anything in terms of Overwatch, hadn't been able to do anything in terms of Overwatch. So the Knight Paladin, if he had survived the Lord of Contagion's attacks and then managed to come back and kill off the Lord of Contagion, who's over here behind this building, I mean, that would have been a complete shift in the game. And then we definitely would have had to do the Ultramarines turn 6 just to see what would happen. But the fact that the Knight Paladin was finished off sort of left the Ultramarines with no options. But the fact that they still, up until him dying off in Death Guard turn 6, the fact that the Ultramarines were still technically in this game and still had a chance through all of that to potentially be able to table the Death Guard. Because looking at the Death Guard army, they only have 7 models left on the table. The Land Raider, an injured Land Raider with 10 wounds, although still at full capacity. A wounded Plague Burst Crawler down to 5 wounds and only at partial capacity. Lord of Contagion with 5 wounds and 4 Poxwalkers, and that's it. There are only 10 models left on the table at the end of the game. 3 Ultramarine, 7 Death Guard, and that's it. So the fact that, had that been changed, had Lord of Contagion died and the Paladin survived, that would have been a big, big difference, and we would have had a very close battle. Now, I think at this point, the Death Guard most likely still would have won, because unless the Ultramarines had tabled the Death Guard, as we saw, there was no way they were going to catch up in terms of victory points. So they really needed to have the chance to table. But I think had he finished off the Lord of Contagion, we would have had that chance. Could have fired his rapid fire battle cannon, one last ditch effort to try to kill off the Plague Burst Crawler, fire off his weapons at the Poxwalkers and potentially kill them off. The Paladin did kill off a 4-man Poxwalker squad over here the turn before. So we know it can happen. Just a little bit slower than we would expect, and then charge the Land Raider and potentially do enough wounds. Because remember, the Thunderstrike Gauntlet has a damage of 6. It does 6 damage per strike if it goes through. And the Land Raider doesn't have an invuln and doesn't have a disgustingly resilient roll. So it only would have had its reduced armor save to keep it from taking 6 damage at a time. So there's a chance it would have taken significant damage. Now, of course, since the Paladin would have only had the 1 wound left, it would have only been hitting on 6s because of how wounded he is. His weapon skill fell to 5, to a 5+, and the Thunderstrike Gauntlet makes you subtract 1 from your hit rolls. So it would have needed 6s to hit. So obviously, maybe a little far-fetched that he would have 2 wounds get past the armor saves, but you never know, and that's part of the what-if scenario. So in terms of everything else from the Ultramarines, the captain and the lieutenant, they did everything they could. Since the Hellblasters were wiped out as quickly as they were, they sort of their whole point was to sort of move up behind the Hellblasters and make it so that they could re-roll the hit and re-roll ones to wound. Because if a whole squad of 10 Hellblasters was moving up the board with the captain and the lieutenant, they could supercharge every single time and be able to re-roll all their failed hit rolls. And so very unlikely that they would even lose anyone to the plasma incinerators overheating. And then, of course, Strength 8, -3 AP, 2 damage apiece. They could do all sorts of damage. I mean, I was sort of expecting these Hellblasters to do a whole bunch of damage to the Death Guard vehicles. Wounding on 4s, making a pretty big deficit in their armor saves and then doing 2 damage apiece. I think, the squad of Hellblasters easily could have torn apart a Plague Burst Crawler or done a lot of damage to the Land Raider right away had they been able to survive. But that's sort of the unfortunate side effect of the Death Guard going first is these guys, they were out in the open. They were definitely an easy target, and they were a big threat, so a worthy target. And I think that's one thing for future battle reports that I'll have to remember. Don't let these guys, these expensive Hellblasters, sit out in the open. That's a bad idea, apparently. Who would have thought? Which means I need more repulsors. But that's a different story. And of course, the Tactical Marines, they did their job. The one thing about the Tactical Marines that was sort of a problem for the Ultramarines, other than the one squad being killed off right away, was one of them was set up right here, a little bit far away from this objective. The problem is their deployment zone from the diagonal line was right about here or so, and so they had to sit up behind it. So they weren't set up on the objective like they normally would had this been a Dawn of War style game. So because of that, I completely forgot to move them turn one up to the objective. And so they weren't holding that objective, which cost them getting an extra tactical objective right away. And so that's my fault. That is completely my fault. That was a strategic blunder. There were a couple this game. I know I forgot the first Plagueburst Crawler that died. I forgot to roll for whether or not it would explode or not. Now, it's only a roll of a 6, so not a very good chance of it happening, but still should remember to roll that. Luckily, I remembered for the Night Titan. But yeah, so the Tactical Marines that were set up in deployment here, I had forgotten to move and really should have moved them up to this tactical objective. So that objective marker, I should say, which would have generated a new tactical objective card and potentially done something for the game, but not necessarily likely. Of course, hindsight's 2020. And from what actually happened in this battle, it's pretty clearly, from how things turned out, a Death Guard victory. So thank you, everyone, for listening to me talk a little bit about my thoughts about what happened in the battle, about some strategic things, some things for me to work on. Of course, if you notice any mistakes, please mark them down in the comments down below so that I can learn from them for next time. I do not want to make the same mistake twice. I'd rather play this game properly, because that would be more enjoyable for everybody. So please comment down below about any suggestions you have as well. Any changes to the armies, any play styles. Still learning both of these armies, and so there's going to be strategic mistakes on both sides, but that only makes it more fair. Please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks for listening to me rant for a while, and stay tuned for the next battle report, which hopefully will come out soon. Bye!